This is a clip from one of our recent live streams. We stream live every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. As a reminder, this is our second channel, Fish the Moment Live. Our main channel, Fish the Moment, is where we have all of our highly edited YouTube content. We spend 30 to 40 hours a week producing one YouTube video that's posted on the Fish the Moment channel every Friday at 7 a.m. Central Standard Time. These videos include on-the-water footage of us actually fishing, as well as detailed instruction on how to use electronics, fish offshore, and a lot of other great information. Make sure to check out the Fish the Moment channel if you enjoy the content on this channel. Let's jump back to some stuff on actual applications of these big baits. So one thing that I find, guys, is that with a big bait, we're talking about these bigger baits, but we also want to talk about how to catch more 4+ pound bass. One thing that I've found that's very, very helpful in catching bigger fish overall when you're trying to go in these areas is picking a bait that is a little bit bigger than what everyone else is throwing and a little bit different. So to give you an example of this, here is my go-to jerk bait that I was fishing this spring over offshore brush piles for the pre-spawn bass. Megabass Vision 110 +1. Dives about 7 to 9 feet deep on a good cast. And this is a really, really solid bait. Caught a ton of big fish on this bait. What I found, though, is that as the spring progressed, a lot of guys were throwing this bait as well. And what I went to later in the year was a little bit bigger bait. This is the Smithwick Perfect 10 Rogue. Now, it doesn't seem like it's that much bigger. It's just, it's slightly bigger than that Vision 110. It's about it's almost about a full inch bigger in general, but that Perfect 10 Rogue dives about the exact same depth. I can actually get a little bit deeper, so I can throw a little bit heavier line. And I was throwing this in the same areas I was throwing this Vision 110 +1, and I actually ended up catching my personal best bass, a 10.5 pounder on this bait. The cast before, I caught a 5 pounder off the same brush pile, caught 2 more fish over 4 pounds on this bait, and I had been throwing this Vision 110 standard and just couldn't get those fish to commit. They weren't biting it. Went to the bigger bait, got them to bite. Again, this is a slight increase in size. This isn't going from a massive or from a tiny bait to a massive bait. It's a small difference in the size of that bait, and probably just fewer guys throw this Vision 1 or this Perfect 10 Rogue. So that's just one example to go to show you guys that if you feel like you're around big fish, upgrading your bait by an inch over what you're currently throwing, sometimes that can make all the difference and can really put more fish in the boat. Another thing I do a lot, if we go over here, here's my the jewel bait VersaCraw I designed for Jewel Bait Company. And with this bait, what you can see is you have this smaller VersaCraw. This is the junior size, and I pair that on the back of a football jig, and I got one right here. It looks really, really nice. It's got a nice profile on the back of that football jig. Fits it really, really well. But what I can do if I want to generate bigger bites, I might get 15 bites a day on this football jig. What I can do is take off that smaller VersaCraw and go to the bigger VersaCraw, the senior size. We don't have it out quite yet. We're going to be putting it out here pretty soon. I'll let you guys know when it's launching. But go into that little bit bigger bait, about an inch longer and having a little bit wider profile. And I'll also leave the skirt a little bit longer. That 1 inch difference in profile will decrease the number of bites you get, but increase the quality of the bites you get, usually by about 1 pound to 1.5 pounds. So I will do that a lot of times if I feel like I don't want to go out and get numbers of bites, or if I feel like a lot of guys in my area are throwing a lot of those baits. I'll go to that big profile and go bigger as opposed to going smaller. A lot of times too, if I'm not getting bit on that smaller jig, or the standard size jig, before I go to like a little shaky head, I'll actually go to a bigger bait first, because I find that bigger bait will trigger those bigger fish into biting. Again, I'm not going to get the number of bites, but it will trigger fish that other guys aren't getting to bite. So that's just something that I've done, guys, that I feel like is really important. Going a little bit bigger with your bait profile, not going all the way to this massive 8-inch bait, and you can get a lot of good bites. What are your thoughts there, Randy?
Yeah, that's probably a more realistic approach. If you fish, I'll talk about a handful of baits here. The old adage is like, big fish and big baits catch big fish is extremely true. Now you can catch big fish on any bait out there. In fact, the lake record, or the old lake record, it was broken on Alabama rig at Grand Lake a couple years ago, but the old lake record of 11 pounds and something at Grand Lake was caught by some dude was crappie fishing off of the Elk River riprap, and he caught an 11.5 pounder on a crappie jig. So you can catch giants on anything, but your odds go up tremendously if you fish those lures that produce big fish. In general, the lure categories that produce the bigger fish are going to be your jigs, like your full size jigs, football head jigs, like what Johnny's talking about, that with the offshore jig he has. Big spinner baits is going to be a big key on there. Jerk baits, big deep diving crankbaits, top waters, and swim baits. Those categories out there, if you want to catch 4 pound plus bass, you have to stay in those categories. You can, yeah, if you're up north or something, you're going to catch 4 pounders on a drop shot. You're going to catch a lot of 4 pound smallmouth on a drop shot, but that's a rarity. Most of the time when you're using those smaller baits, like the smaller crankbaits, even the medium-sized crankbaits, Texas rig worms, creature baits, any of that type of category, your odds of catching big ones are still there, but they go way down unless you just stay with those bait profiles. I'm going to guess, as far as the time that I fished over the last 50 years, the amount of time that I have fished every single lure category versus the amount of 4 pound plus bass that I've caught, in my opinion, a big spinnerbait is the most efficient way to catch big fish. It produces big ones, it produces quality bass, and you can still get numbers on it. I bet that I've caught more big bass, when I'm talking about big ones, like 7 pound plus fish on like a big spinnerbait with a big blade on it, Colorado or Willow, either one, slow rolling it. It's a big bait, it goes slow.
If you enjoy our videos and want more help finding bass on your home lake, head to our website, fishthemoment.com, then head to the Lake Breakdowns page. Here we offer lake breakdowns that give you 40 GPS waypoints that you can transfer straight to your fish finder on lakes all across the country. We give you detailed area descriptions, a summary of the lake, and a step-by-step guide on how to download the waypoints to your fish finder. These waypoints are picked out by professional angler Randy Blockett. We have breakdowns on lakes all across the country, broken up by season. If you can't find your lake among the list of lakes available here, we also offer personalized lake breakdowns where you can have your specific lake broken down if it's not already available. Check out our lake breakdowns on fishthemoment.com.
It moves a lot of water, has a lot of vibration. So that's the whole thing about it. If you want to catch 4 pound plus fish those baits that produce big ones.
Yeah, and this is one of the spinnerbaits I throw. It doesn't look that different from a normal spinnerbait, but this is a 1 ounce Booyah Covert series spinnerbait with a size 6 willow leaf, and I've actually gone up to a size 7 willow leaf at times. That's a really big blade. The standard size, if you buy a spinnerbait out of the package, your standard half-ounce spinnerbait has a 4.5 size blade. So this is a size 6, a lot bigger blade. I've gone to a size 7 before to catch some fish. This is what Randy's talking about. You need that heavier head, that 1 ounce, 3/4 ounce to 1 ounce head, because this blade is going to kick up a lot more vibration and a lot more lift. So you need a heavier head to keep that bait down the strike zone. But that is kind of the spinnerbait profile that we're talking about, big spinnerbait. Here's a Strike King 10XD crankbait, catches a lot of big fish. Caught a lot of big fish on this exact one here. One thing to call out though is that these big baits, Randy, they're not always the best choice when you're fishing in a tournament. So yeah. I know that a lot of times in tournaments, there's so much fishing pressure around that unless you get those ideal conditions, the wind, the cloud cover going, and everyone's catching them, if everyone is catching fish and the fish are super aggressive, going to a big bait is great because you're going to get bigger bites in your competition. But if the bite is really tough and there's a lot of fishing pressure, going to a big bait is usually not going to be your best option. Can you kind of give us some insight there?
Well, I'll use a prime example. A lot of you guys know who Elite Series Pro Carl Jacobson is. Is it Jacobson or Jacobson?
I think.
Jacobson.
Oh, yeah.
Carl loves to fish a big glide bait, and he's had a lot of success doing it. But if you notice it, there's been like a half a dozen Elite Series tournaments where he's like been leading the first day of the tournament with a 20 pound plus bag on a big glide bait, and then the next day he catches one on it. So that's what you're looking at it. It's like, to me, the big baits out there are supplemental. I try to approach it from a realistic point of view. Some guys out there, Steve Kennedy, Carl, I've seen Skeet Reese do it a little bit. So there's a handful of guys out there that can pick these baits up, throw them all day long in a tournament situation. But for me, the only time I really throw them is if I get what I feel is in that window, or I've got a good limit of fish and I'm trying for a kicker in there. But it's highly situational, and that's one thing that you're going to find about the big bait categories. It doesn't matter if it's spinnerbait, jigs, crankbaits, topwaters, whatever. The more time that you have on the water and the more dirt time that you have fishing, the more that you know when to automatically pick up that bait and throw it. So there's actually two different schools of thought there. There's the school of thought that I just told you there, and then there's the other school of thought that if you just throw it all day long, that you're going to put yourself in position to win. And I'll use an example here again with the 262 glide bait. 3 years ago, they had a big bass bash at Lake of the Ozarks, and Oliver and I fished it with a friend of mine. It was a team deal, and they won the tournament. They won $100,000 on the 262T glide bait at Lake of the Ozarks. And Oliver told me he practiced for that tournament for 2 days, threw nothing but the glide bait for 2 days. And then the 2-day tournament, it was a 2-day tournament. Both of them did nothing but throw the 262 for 2 solid days, never put it down. They had 4 bites in 2 days, and 4 bites actually in 4 days, 2 days practice and 2 days tournament. A 6.8 pounder, which won the tournament. They lost one about 7, he said, and they had a 4 pounder and a 3 pounder. So look how many hours that is. That's a total of 16. That's 32 hours of fishing. Probably, I'm going to guess, well over 10,000 casts for 4 bites. But he won $100,000 doing it. So it's all about, what your goals and expectations are as far as how much you should or shouldn't adopt this.
And for some guys, that might be really cool, but for other guys who get to fish 1 day a week, or maybe 1 day a month, committing to that, especially like Oliver, again, he's an expert at that. So we shouldn't take the fact that he was able to get 4 bites in 4 days, and he's an expert. That just goes to show you might get 1 bite in 4 days. You have to keep that in mind. But if you do want to figure out how to get these fish to bite these baits and when to use them, our recommendation by far is to just find one of these baits you want to throw. Let's say you want to catch them on an 8-inch flutter spoon offshore. You probably want to buy a couple of these things if you're going to throw them all day, because you will hang them and lose them, and they're not cheap. But let's say you want to do it. Go buy a bunch of them and just throw it all day long and figure out when they're going to bite it. That's what I've done with these baits. All these baits we're talking about, guys, I've had to just go out over the years, take one of these baits and go, and I probably spent like a 10XD. When I first got my hands on this, I spent 6 days on the water just throwing the 6XD to finally figure out when, where, and how to get these fish to bite. I needed to know what type of cover, what type of drops, how big the schools of fish needed to be, all these different things. So now that I've taken that time to build that knowledge, I now have it tied onto my boat, and if I ever get a situation that calls for it, I'll pull it out of the box, make 10 to 15 casts with it, and maybe I'll fish it for an hour even, and see if I can get him to go on it. And it can be great when it happens, just like our day on Table Rock. But a lot of times it's not that easy. And you shouldn't ever pick up a bait like this, guys, like a big swim bait or something like that, going out and banking on your day of catching fish on this type of bait. That was almost like a fool's errand for us, Randy, when we went out yesterday. I was like, oh, that was a bad decision, because like I had a school of fish, Randy, that was these school of spotted bass. And I was throwing a bait similar to this out there, and I had so many fish. I was watching them on my live scope. They were hitting it, getting it all over it, and I was just so frustrated because they were big spotted bass. I had 2 of them jump off halfway to the boat. If I had been throwing like a 4-inch swim bait or a 3-inch swim bait, I would have probably caught 15 fish for like 13-pound limit. But because I committed to that, nothing worked out. But then later in the day, I kept throwing it, and I started getting better quality fish even than that. But they were largemouth up shallow. So if I could have mixed those together and said, okay, I knew that I should throw the smaller swim bait on these offshore fish in the first 6 hours, I could have a 13-pound limit. Then in the feeding window, if I would know to put the small swim bait down, pick up the other bait, start throwing it, boom, now you start catching more fish and you can kind of upgrade. So that's kind of the way you have to think about it, guys. It's not usually the best idea to if you're going out with your goal of catching as many fish as possible and having a fun day, that's not usually the objective of these big baits. It's usually They're very situational. You should throw them when they're working, but if you want to learn how to throw them, you just have to force yourself to have some bad days with them. Would you agree there, Randy?
Yeah, no doubt. And knowing when to throw them is another big key.
Thanks for checking out the video. If you made it this far, we'd really appreciate if you left a like on the video. It helps us out with the YouTube algorithm and gets these videos out to more people. Also consider subscribing. It's free and it lets you get notifications of every single one of our videos that we upload daily. Finally, remember to check out the main Fish the Moment channel, where we actually have on-the-water fishing footage as well as detailed graphics on electronics, offshore fishing, bass behavior, and a lot of other great information. Thanks for checking out the video, and we'll see you all in the next one.